Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. Just after 1:15, so we're just letting everybody in there. I hope you're all doing well, and thanks a million for joining today's session, which is all about seed saving, but obviously the usual array of questions from people and discussions and updates from the garden here. And no doubt the usual array of jokes and crackology between myself and Richard. So hope your summer has been good. It's very hard to believe that it's the 30th of August rather, and that we're facing into September in just a few days' time, and that kids are back to school and all of that. It feels like, I don't know about you, Richard, but it feels like there was um, it felt like a very short summer, but then that's probably me being kind of partially based in an office work job and all of that.
And also you having a summer holiday probably seemed a little bit shorter as well.
Yeah, well, that's true. How has the summer been for you?
Not too bad for growing. It last year was awful with the dry June followed by the cold, wet July, August. But this year, it's not been too bad at all. Most things have grown fairly well. A little bit later because it's not been that warm, but I'm looking out now through my shed window at some healthy looking squashes growing well. Last year they were horribly miserable. Healthy kale beet. So yeah, most things have done okay. Not the best year ever, but certainly not the worst.
Yeah. What hasn't done well? I feel like potatoes were challenging this year and a few other things, but what's your sense of how that's all been?
Um, I suppose the lack of heat has meant the tunnel and glasshouse crops have produced in a sort of lackluster way. Like I was harvesting tomatoes this morning, but not the huge yields you'd get in a really warm summer. Uh, Peppers are very late. Aubergines are quite a poor crop. So yes, I think the things that like a lot of heat haven't done so well. But the bog standard stuff outside, lovely carrots coming off beets, kale, chard, all look very healthy. Celery, celeriac, all growing well. So yeah, I'm happy enough.
Yeah. So I think we should, for the benefit of people that might be curious about it, give a bit of an update on the market garden in Curramore as well, because we've gone from having for since 2016, like having our 3 acre urban garden here in Grow HQ in Waterford, and trying to produce as much veg as we can for the kitchen here, and always having a bit of a gap between what we can grow and what the kitchen needed, and certainly never having any surplus to sell, to now having a bigger wall garden as well in the Curramore estate in Portlaw, which is about half an hour up the road from us here. And having been able to stretch our legs a good bit, and we've got veg for sale for the first time in the shop here, and we've got eggs for sale, and we have our box scheme live and all of that. So it's a very different year for us, Richard. Do you want to give it just a bit of an update on how that's all been?
Yes, it's been an extremely busy year. But we've got there now. We're supplying all the veg we need for our boxes. That seems to be well received by the eating public of Waterford. And eggs are just starting to come off. They're the lovely little pullet eggs now, half size as the hens are getting a little bit older. And we've got plenty of veg for the kitchen. In fact, chef moaning a little bit about having too much and too much choice now, which is nice. So it's
he used to be moaning about not having enough. So I think there's
yes,
a consistency there, at least, that he's still moaning. That's good.
that's it. And also, I think Mick is going to be approaching you for a new fridge because his fridge is always full to the gunnels at the moment with fresh produce. So I think
Yeah.
that'll be his next request, I imagine.
Yeah. So anyway, that has been absolutely fantastic, and I guess the thing we've had to get our head around at the same time as just getting that veg produced, Richard, is like the uniqueness of the setting, which is a beautiful old wall garden in the Curramore estate. What's been your kind of highlights and lowlights there? I can think of a couple of the lowlights already, but I'll let you
The
speak to.
highlight really was the quality of the soil. I've had the good fortune a few times in my career now to work on opening up old wall gardens, and with the addition of rotted manure for generations, essentially, you end up with a soil. I think there's a word for Irish for it actually. For somebody told me in the West, and Kerry, the soils that have been improved by additions of organic matter and so on. But I don't know any Irish, I can't remember what the word is. But these soils have incredible amounts of organic matter and fertility, and we've added nothing to the soil at all. And all the veg that's coming off is the innate fertility in the land. Obviously, we will steward it carefully, make sure that the fertility is replaced. We're not going to mine the soil fertility, but to start off with the soil that fertile in organic production is just a huge starting point. So, as Mick knows, any excuse to go on about soils and soil management, but I've said very little about it actually because there's very little needs doing. But we will make sure that we leave it as fertile as we've found it, but we don't have to build the fertility, which is a massively good starting point. The low point would have to be the wet spring. Irish agriculture was a week or two off complete failure in late March, early April, when we were literally standing in water on the site, as so many other farmers were as well. But so the sun came out in April and saved the day all over the country, really. So that was a relief. And then don't ask me about the pheasants. I've never had a pest like it. And
Well,
I've been busy checking up
Catherine,
recipes for pheasants. My mother used to cook them, and we used to borrow them from neighbouring fields, myself and my brother. But I'm going to try and remember the recipes. I think they drove me absolutely insane. But everything is under net, so it doesn't look very visually attractive. You've got 3 acres of veg under crop nets at the moment, but that's the way we keep it safe from pheasants.
yeah, that was, and you said to me, I think at one stage, the organic matter, it's typically around 2 to 3%, is it? And in
Well,
the garden, it's
in badly managed arable soils where we need to discuss things like regenerative agriculture to bring organic matter levels back. Some really good organic farms can be pushing towards double figures. And that's what we here on this side. We've taken fairly poor soil and we're pushing that now. But it's I can't remember, it's either 17 or 16% on the soil analysis. It's through the roof. I've never seen anything like it. So it's fabulous soil, yeah.
it's a very interesting discussion then we had, because we did want to have a regenerative approach to managing the land, and obviously regenerative farming is a bit of a buzzword at the moment, and maybe not terribly understood, or certainly not regulated as a phrase. But generally speaking, we wanted to do no harm to the soil and use kind of natural practices to regenerate it. But when soil is that good, your job isn't regeneration at all. It's actually, as you say, not mining the fertility and not bringing that organic.
Yeah, it's maintaining the fertility. Yeah, definitely not regenerating fertility.
Yeah,
As a grower, it's a very fortunate position to be in.
yeah. Fantastic. Okay, well, look, that's the update, and certainly anyone who's based in Waterford, if you're interested in a weekly box of that delicious veg from that super healthy soil, you can sign up for that. You collect them here on a Saturday morning, and there's also some of the surplus then that doesn't go into the box available to buy in the shop, and those lovely eggs as well. So do check that out if you're in Waterford. But getting down to business then, just before we start on the topic of seed saving, Michael has a question there about suitable crops for sowing at this time of the year, particularly in the tunnel. That's a great question, Richard, because we kind of tend to feel, our seed sowing is done for the year, but there's still some stuff we can do in August and September, right?
Very much so. I'll just start outside. I'll answer the tunnel question. Remember, a good mantra for managing your soils is bare soil bad. So you want something covering your soil over the winter. A useful crop is probably the most sensible thing to put in, and still plenty of time to sow corn salad and winter purslane and coriander. If you move quickly on those three, they can be used to cover soil. Failing that, a green manure, something like the Landsberger mix, which is clover and grass, or Phacelia, you can still sow that now. Keep the soil alive by having live things in it. But in a tunnel, you've got a fair bit of leeway. Winter salads are the best thing to have in there. And the brassica salads, and obviously the things I just mentioned to go outside. But you can go quite late. You can go well into October for sowing those in a tunnel. And that'll give you lovely salads through the winter. I tend to have a gap from November, December, because anything you sow then will tend to bolt without really getting going. So then start sowing again in January. But I think when a tunnel's probably its most useful. You can get lovely fresh greens in the middle of a miserable winter, and a nice plate of mustard and rocket and so on. A bit of colour and spiciness and freshness on your plate is very welcome in November, I think.
What about, is it too late to sow in a tunnel the kind of, the leafy greens like perpetual spinach and chard and kale and things like that, Richard?
Yeah, you could. Really, yes. You could get some baby chard or spinach. Now, spinach is billed as being sowable well into October, but in my experience, it doesn't do brilliantly. So now you give it a try. That's a lovely thing. If I can't afford failures, otherwise you'd sack me, I suppose. But in your back garden, you can mix and match, and some people can have success with spinach, regular spinach rather than perpetual. But you could put perpetual spinach in and have little little baby leaves for a salad. But give it a go with a few rows and see what you think is always a good idea. Kale, again, if you want baby kale like the Red Russian or whatever for a salad, yeah, you can still put that in. But you're not going to get kale for having with your Sunday lunch. You're going to get baby kale for salads.
Yeah. One thing that I've done very successfully for the last couple of years is sowing overwintering onions in the polytunnel at this time of the year from sets, and getting a lovely crop of onions to use from like even April on. We started using them as kind of, started using the thinnings and things like that. So I know you wouldn't do that in your tunnels from a space management perspective, but that's worked quite well for me.
Yeah, so, there's not an economic yield for me. Again, you'd probably sack me if I wasn't getting my 20 euros a square meter out of the tunnels. So that you can do that. You can also sowing onions from seed is a lot cheaper, and we had a dreadful experience here of white rot coming in on onion sets. So onion sets are banned from the holding, from as far as I'm concerned here now. But sow the seeds, and I have done that occasionally because you get a thinning of scallions in sort of March time, and then you start getting green onions for the kitchen in April. So that can be a worthwhile use of space when you're not buying the onion sets in.
Yeah, very good.
Make sure you're using an overwintered onion. Make sure I tell everybody about the physiological response of onions to day length and temperature, or shall we do that another time?
Oh, go for it, Richard. Knock yourself out. That's people love hearing you talking about that stuff.
I think he sounds genuine, but there's onions respond to day length, and if you're going over the winter, you need to have an onion that bulbs up at quite short days to bulb up in April, May. So don't sow the regular onions like stir on or something like that, which are to be sown in the spring. I got it over quite quickly there, didn't I?
Yeah, that was surprisingly brief. I was gearing up to do a big job in the background here, maybe check my inbox or eat my lunch or whatever. So that's disappointing. You were so quick. What about covering down soil in the tunnel? So if you've got beds that you said bare soil bad inside in the tunnel, is it would you be looking at something similar like a green manure or
You certainly can. I I wouldn't bother in the tunnels in that the best green manure is something you can eat as well. So the salads are covering the ground, but the soil doesn't suffer quite as much as outside because it's not the rain and everything damaging the soil surface and water running through. But what is good is to maintain something growing in the soil and keep the soil moist in the tunnel to keep it lively. Keep all your bugs
yeah.
and beasties happy. So sorry.
So so like I have a question on this, right, that I'm a little confused on. So green manures, I understand, are partly about maintaining the soil structure and protecting the soil, right? But are they also about feeding the soil, or is that am I wrong about that?
You're partly there as ever, Mick. But
Partly
the
there as ever. That's nice.
yeah, they they are, as you say,
Sorry,
have
the
roots.
reason I'm asking that is because, like, will if you're growing, say, Mizuna or Rocket or whatever in a tunnel over the winter, that's hardly going to feed the soil. Like, that's going to be extracting nutrients from the soil, right?
Well, I wouldn't. No, the main thing is to keep it alive, as you say, have roots in there, and that feeds
Yeah,
all the fungi and bacteria that make for a healthy soil and earthworms and so on as well. Um, the outside, the main role of an overwinter green manure is to absorb the nitrogen which is in the soil and released by organic matter rotting. Nitrogen is released into the soil that washes away in the winter when you get heavy rain. If you have all the roots in the soil, they'll absorb it and it stays in the plant, it doesn't get washed into groundwater. So you're not actually making fertility, you are absorbing what it becomes available and making it available for another crop. In the tunnel, you don't get that leaching, so you don't lose the nitrogen
uh-huh.
unless you keep it enough to overwater in the winter. But um, a longer term green manure over a year, you can get nitrogen fixation with clover. Uh,
Yeah,
I think that's what you're thinking about. But that doesn't really happen with an overwintered green manure because nitrogen, the bacteria that live in the root nodules that fix nitrogen out of the air, they only really do that when the soil is warmer than 10 degrees, when the plants got established. So there's very, very little nitrogen fixed from clover that's grown as an overwinter thing. It has to be grown through the summer, and that's when it all happens. So people get a bit confused on this.
yeah.
Outside, you're mopping up nitrogen, you're not making nitrogen. In the tunnel,
Okay,
it's not really relevant.
okay. That's good. So on that point, Ian is asking, are field beans a good green manure for outside?
They are, if you leave them in long enough to um, fix nitrogen in the spring, but if you're taking a crop of beans off them, then most of the nitrogen fix ends up in the beans. So there's very little gain for a subsequent crop. It's fairly minimal.
Okay,
And they're not, none of the grain legumes, the peas and the beans are as effective as clovers and vetches.
okay. That makes sense. But I guess so they are going to do the same job of protecting the soil and getting the roots in
Oh
there,
yeah,
keeping the soil alive.
have something growing in the soil. Yeah, broad beans grow over the winter are a great crop to have in. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so look, I'm probably robbing from a future topic, getting too much into kind of winter soil management in at the end of August. So I think we'll move on to seed saving. Like I guess by way of intro, I would say like it feels like seed sowing feels like, or sorry, seed saving feels like a bit of a dark art sometimes, and obviously there's organizations out there like Seed Saver, Irish Seed Savers, and people like Madeline from Brown Envelope Seeds, who we've had here recently doing a course in Grow HQ, who are fantastic resources for that. I guess my limited sort of experience of seed sowing is really things like tomatoes, where I have a good, a good variety that I want to make sure I have the seed for the following year, and it feels very easy to do it. It feels like a kind of something that you might get into having built up a bit of experience in growing veg in the first instance, and therefore isn't maybe something for when you're starting out first. What's your sense overall of seed saving, Richard? I always feel like I love buying my seeds, and so I don't feel terribly compelled to save seed, but at the same time I understand the bigger picture here, that sort of self-sufficiency around seed supply and all of that is very important. But what's your view on it before we get into some of the questions people have
Um,
sent in?
yeah, I know the feeling about buying seeds. Very fond memories of being a child, sitting with my dad in January and going through the catalogues and deciding what we were going to grow. It seemed to start the year off. But um, certain things which you take to the point of having a seed in are very, very easy to save seeds from. So the easiest is probably, you mentioned there, broad beans. You grow them for the seeds. You just leave them on to dry, and you're growing the seeds anyway. Tomatoes, the seeds, squashes. So they're fairly straightforward. The quick growing brassica salads are very straightforward. I only You can really only save one at a time if you want to keep breed them pure. But I would every so often there might be a failure for different things when I was growing my commercial leaves, and I would just save, might be green mustard or Mizuna or whatever it was, which I couldn't get seeds of, just save them. But they occupy the land for a long time till they're dried. So, but they're very straightforward. It's I mean, somebody like Madeline, when she came to do the seed course here, stripped out all the terminology and so on. It's quite straightforward. You have to remember plants, all they want to do is produce a seed. That's what they're there for. And so you let them do it. Just in terms of varieties and so on, with your tomatoes, I assume they're open pollinated ones you choose. If you have an F1 variety, and F1 is two inbred lines crossed, and F1 is the first cross, they won't breed true. You'll be able to save seed from them, but they'll be all over the place genetically if you save the F2, the second generation. So make sure you have open pollinated varieties if you want anything semi-reliable saved. So get an open pollinated variety, and say anything that you're growing to have a fruit or a seed is relatively straightforward, just to dry and sow. It's an interesting little addition to what you're doing, really. But things like the overwintered stuff like carrots, parsnips, onions, they're all biennials, so the plant produces a storage organ, which is the thing we eat. If we leave it in the ground and don't eat it, next spring it'll produce a seed head, and you can get thousands of seeds from one seed head. Plenty of instructions out there to what to do with them then. So it can be an interesting additional thing to what you do.
On the onions, Pauline, I think, asked there. Well, that exactly that question. Can you use the seed head? I have onions actually, Richard, that are producing a seed head in storage. Is that common? Like I have them laid, I harvested them and laid them out in the polytunnel to dry, and they're producing seed heads.
Yeah, that happens if you don't grow them right.
I fucking
So
knew
I'll tell you. I'll explain again, Mick, how you grow onions. No, this.
I knew I was setting myself up for vicious abuse by
I'm
admitting
here
to
to
that.
help. You know what I'm here for. And eventually I'll get you to understand onion growing. So I'll explain it again. The An onion's a biennial, so it produces a storage organ 1 year and flowers the next. But if you have an onion set, that is an onion that's already had 1 year. So did you grow them from sets or seed?
From seed, in fact, actually, maybe I can blame you for some of this because some of them were actually seedlings that you gave me that you had excess ones here. So in your
Well,
face.
mine haven't bolted, so no, they can bolt, but if you grow them from seed, you're much less likely to have bolting.
Yeah, well,
Uh,
they were from seed. I didn't use any sets for
yeah,
my spring.
um, at some point they've got a mixed message over the year, and it's probably down to the cold, wet spring. If you put them
Yeah.
out and they're big enough in the spring, it's a balance because you want to start them early so you get a decent sized onion. If you start them too early and you put a little seedling out and then it gets miserable cold weather, which we got, it can think it's had a winter. So that's basically the
Mm.
thing. You're balancing off a decent sized onion, and if I give chef small onions, he sulks. So I have to get them as big as possible and start as early as possible. But then you do risk, and I have had one or two bolters. Then
But
you do
how
bolting.
is it possible for it to produce the seed head after it's out of the ground? Like it's not, do you know what I mean? I would have thought it's not
Oh,
possible for it
it's
to.
still alive and growing.
So
But
so it's
when you
it's
are
this.
drying your onions, when I've done trials, you're much better off, even with the normal sunshine and showers, sort of Irish August. You're better off having them outside for a week or two first,
Okay. Maybe.
and possibly going into a really hot tunnel might have encouraged them a little bit to bolt at that point.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
That's an inspired guess. I don't know, but it could have done.
Yeah. And of course, when they produce a seed head, you get a kind of a quite a hard green stalk in the onion itself. So
Yeah,
it is problematic. It's not just like looks okay, or it's
yeah.
problematic
You
from a
want to use
storage
them
perspective.
green as soon as you see something developing. They're not quite so hard in the middle then.
Okay, fair enough. All right, so just give us a couple of practical examples, maybe. You mentioned some of the things, and I put them in the comments or in the chat there early on about some of the things that are relatively easy to save seed from. So you mentioned broad beans, tomatoes, squashes, presumably courgettes as well,
Well, yeah.
brassicas.
Remember, with a courgette, you have to leave it to make a marrow because that's a mature courgette.
Yeah,
So
okay,
you
and you
leave it to get
maybe
big, fat, and hard skin, and then there's seeds inside.
and you maybe don't want to do that because if it's producing those big marrows, it's not giving you nice little small courgettes for eating.
Yeah, it's always with a garden a matter of if you're producing seeds, you're not producing veg to eat so much. So
Yeah,
I wouldn't go over the top with having one marrow will supply you with dozens of seeds. So I wouldn't go over the top with
yeah.
so.
Actually, on that point, we've our podcast series, Food Matters. We've got Mark Diacono as our guest in the episode that's been released next week, and he says that if a courgette is larger than a large cigar, like a Cuban cigar, it has about as much place on your plate as my old man's hanky was the phrase that he used. I don't know if you'd agree with that, Richard. Would you? Do you think marrows have any place in a kitchen or on the
Well,
table,
yeah,
or should they?
yeah. I mean, chef uses a few, and we've sold one or two in the shop. It's when you miss a courgette, and the following week you've got a marrow essentially. Um, I like to use marrow for gloop in a curry. You know, it provides so it's a great base You make it a very tasty curry, but you wouldn't necessarily know if there was a marrow in there. Certainly, when I used to sell courgettes to restaurants, they often wanted one with a flower on the end. Yeah, cigar size with a flower on the end. But um, I think
Do you
sounds like
cut the
you
do you,
can get them bigger. I mean, we put in the box scheme what people seem to want is something about that sort of size, and that's what
yeah.
they get.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think cigar size feels a little wasteful to me, that you're not getting much crop for your much bang for your buck. Do you cut off
As a
the
commercial grower, you get a really good price for them. So I used to harvest them like that with a flower on, and you got a lovely price for them.
do you cut the skin off the marrow when you're putting it into the curry?
Oh yeah,
Yeah, okay.
yeah. I mean, a proper marrow actually has a hard skin like a squash. Well, it is a
Yeah.
squash.
Okay, so practically speaking, how do you save seeds from like the squash and courgette? Obviously, the seeds are in the inside, easy to get at. What do you do with them then, though? Do you need to do anything particular with the seeds to save them?
Yeah, dry them.
Right.
Really.
See, you need to get the kind of pulpy bits off first, I guess.
Um, I would. I mean, when I've saved them from squash and so on, I've just dried them off in a dry, airy place, and that will. The pulp in the middle has inhibitors, germination inhibitors, but they're usually removed from drying. People can wash them, but I never bother. Um, and with same with tomatoes, just dry them.
So you
Dry
put
them
them,
on tissue paper is a common thing to do.
yeah. And how long do you need to dry them for before you put them into an envelope or whatever your seed pack is?
Have them uh, have them really bone dry, rustly dry. So a few weeks definitely.
Yeah. Okay.
I've never really
Uh,
timed it to be honest. I used to leave them there in a corner of the glasshouse benching or something, and then later on, when the weather's getting a bit cooler and damper, put them in an airtight container. We had
okay.
some
So
questions, Mick. I noticed earlier on a
yeah,
couple of
are
them.
you are you getting bored with my line of questioning? You want me to move on?
No, I was just thinking people who bothered to put a question in advance, and I think we need
Well,
to.
I'm trying to carefully manage our time allocation
Are
here,
you
Richard.
okay? I
So
didn't realise you were carefully managing it. I thought you were just rambling. Yeah.
no, I'm not. I'm trying to give practical skills here. So we
Okay,
we
I'll go back to being managed then, Mick.
so what about tomatoes? How do you save seeds from tomatoes? Your favorite tomato
Again,
variety?
uh, dry them, and if you dry them properly, then they'll be storable, and get them
Yeah.
really rustily dry.
Am I right in thinking if you squeeze the pulp and the seeds of a tomato into water that they'll separate and the seeds will come apart? Am I right in thinking that? Does that make sense?
They will, yeah. I mean, some people wash them, as I say. I tend to do things as quick as I can like this, and I found that just literally just drying on tissue paper,
Yeah.
anything that's in the pulp, just which is acting as a germination inhibitor, tends to be removed then.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So with feeling suitably chastened, I'm going to move on to the questions that were sent in. Some of them are very, very directly about seed saving, so I might start with those ones. So Donna is asking about freezing seeds as a method of
I
saving.
saw that question, yeah. Um, Now I've never done it, but of course the seed banks, which are trying to preserve seeds in places like Svalbard, in the Arctic, um, they are freezing them, and they will last a very long time. Um, I've no idea specifically whether you just put seeds in the freezer or whether you have to do some prep first. So you can certainly freeze seeds, and that's used to preserve genetic material. But well, I'm going to, as an experiment, I'm going to put some salad seed in the freezer for a few months and then see what happens afterwards. If it should be fine.
Like
Um,
I'm assuming if you had, say, a variety of tomato that you absolutely loved and you saved like 1,000 seeds from it, you could freeze some of them and use some of them, because they will keep for like 2 or 3 years anyway, won't they?
Oh yeah, for seed saving, as it were, saving your seeds, whether you bought them or produced your own. Uh, Seeds need to be kept as dry as possible, and I've got them here in front of me actually. I have plastic containers, and inside them I have the. Hopefully, I'll find some. Yeah, the little silica gel containers to make sure it's kept bone dry. Apparently, if you buy the right sort of shoes, not my work boots, but you buy the right sort of shoes, you get those, or if you buy a camera or binoculars, you can have them. They're very handy. They keep the air dry. So a sealed container, keep them cool. Basically, you store seeds in the opposite way to germinating them. Germination, they need moisture and warmth. For storing, then you want cool and dry. And tomatoes, I've sown tomatoes 5 years old seed, absolutely fine. I've sowed broccoli 10 years old and had good results. So, if you store them like that, you'll get many years out of them. Certain things like parsnips, to some extent, carrots, parsley, onions are really bad storers, and I would buy fresh of those every year.
Okay.
But there's not really a massive pattern to it. Some seeds store well, some don't. And I think it's on it should be on, if it's not, our veg information pages, how long you can store seeds for.
Yeah, okay. So a good rule of thumb is probably 2 to 3 years, but like as I said, there's a few outliers there, isn't there?
Too variable, yeah.
Yeah.
But what if you save seeds and you don't want to run the risk of putting them out and getting a germination failure? Just do a germination test. Put them in ideal conditions. Put them in the hot press in a sealed plastic container. Put 10 seeds in and see your percentage germination. Really, on a little bit of tissue paper or something at like 20 degrees, and you'll see if they're any good anymore.
Yeah, very good. So I think that probably addresses Gail's question, which she sent in about how long to store seeds. John is asking, if you save seeds, can you continue doing that year on year from the same produce? Is there a time limit or on the number of generations?
No, I worked in Africa in my younger days, in Uganda, and the local farmers there had been saving seed forever, really. They didn't buy seeds for things like their beans or their grain crops like millet and so on. So no, there's no limit. Most traditionally, geneticists would say that you just get the safe genetics going on, but increasing evidence is something called epigenetics, where the way the genes are expressed can be influenced by the environment, and you might end up with something that's quite suitable for your soil and your climate. So the genes won't be altered, but the way the genes are expressed could be altered. So that is a very traditional agricultural practice, and you should end up with something that suits where you are. But be selective. Pick the biggest and the best, or the tastiest, or whatever. And that's what people have done traditionally in like subsistence agriculture, and you'll end up with creating your own little perfect veg or whatever.
That's like evolution, right? It's survival of the fittest. So if you're selecting the best, you're basically you're kind of helping move that along.
Yeah. Unnatural selection, I suppose, is what you call it.
I suppose it is, yeah. So, and then the final question, it's more of a general one, I think, from Bernie. She says, is it better to sow seeds in soil or in seed trays for transplanting later? I think it depends on the veg, Bernie. But Richard, do you want to answer that as our last question?
Well, you know my answer, that you always sow in the soil unless there's a good reason not to. Plants don't want to be moved. They will always grow best if they start where they finish. But there's often good reasons for transplanting. If you want to start something earlier, Get it going early in the year, so you're early transplanting crops like lettuce or kale or broccoli. It gives you a much earlier start. Um, if you've got a really intensive garden and the grounds are occupied with a crop finishing off, for instance, if you want to, say, have overwintered broad beans and then you want to follow it with lettuce, you can have the lettuce in a tray ready to go out as soon as your broad beans finish for really efficient use. And certain crops, like I would say squashes are like that. In England, it's a bit drier and warmer. You can get away with sowing squashes outside. Ireland, our summer's a bit shorter, and I've never got a good crop without growing them, starting them inside, and then transplanting after the frosts have gone in June. So they'd all be good reasons for transplanting. But as a general rule, plants are happiest being sown where they're going to finish.
Okay. And the final question then from Miriam, when a radish produces flower, is it gone to seed? How do you get the seed from the flower?
Right. They let them stay on the radish as long as possible, with the radish in the ground, until it's going a bit yellow and miserable. And then the way I've always collected seeds, the easiest way, hang them upside down with a Hessian sack or something underneath, something that allows a little bit of air flow. Just tie it right. You've got a bundle upside down of your radishes or whatever, and let the seeds fall out into the bag. The plant will get rid of the seeds when it's ready. What I used to do with, which you could also do with radish, with Mizuna and so on, if I was saving a seed, I'd lay them on a tarpaulin and just whack them with a cane or something to encourage the pods to split. But they will split naturally if you just let them into a bag.
Brilliant. Because I managed our time so expertly and
I never realized you were
seamlessly,
doing that.
we are finished now with 3 minutes to spare. So unless anybody have any last minute questions, throw them into the chat. Otherwise, we're going to wrap it up there at 2 p.m. on the dot and let you get back to your lunch or finish your lunch and get back to work maybe. So I hope you enjoyed that session. Thanks a million to everybody for joining, and we'll see you at the end of September for our next session. And may it be a fruitful autumn for you. I hope the harvesting is good. So thanks, Richard, for that, and thanks everyone for joining.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care. Happy growing.